The night was heavy with silence, the kind that carried weight, pressing down on the world like an invisible force. The flickering candlelight barely illuminated the worn-out wooden table, where Elijah sat, staring at the ancient book in front of him. The pages were yellowed, brittle with time, their edges curling like the fingers of a forgotten spirit. He had spent years searching for the truth, and now it lay before him, both a revelation and a curse. For generations, his family had been plagued by darkness. Misfortunes followed them like a shadow. Deaths came too early, and dreams turned to dust before they could bloom. His grandmother used to whisper stories of an old betrayal, of a pact made in secrecy, but no one ever spoke it aloud. Those who did disappeared. Elijah never believed in curses. He was a man of logic, a thinker, a realist. But logic could not explain the nightmares that tormented him every night. The voices that called his name from the darkness, the cold touch that ran down his spine when he was alone. Nor could it explain the way his family suffered, one after another, as if something unseen was claiming its due. But now everything made sense. The book, the family secret, the thing that lurked in the shadows. It all pointed to one truth. Someone in his own bloodline had bound their soul to the darkness, trading the future of their family for power. And now, after all these years, the end had come for the dark magician among them. Elijah clenched his fists, his breath coming in short, ragged bursts. If he didn't act now, the cycle would continue. He was the only one left who could break the chain. But to do so, he needed to find the one responsible, the hidden puppet master pulling the strings from the shadows. A gust of wind blew through the open window, snuffing out the candle's flame. The room plunged into darkness, and with it came a whisper, low, guttural, inhuman. "You are too late, Elijah." The descent into darkness. Elijah bolted upright, his heart pounding against his ribs. His hands trembled as he reached for the candle, relighting it with unsteady fingers. The shadows danced wildly on the walls, taking on twisted, grotesque forms. He knew now, this was no longer just a family mystery. It was a war. Determined, he packed the book into his satchel and left the house, his destination clear, the old family estate, where the last of his bloodline still resided. His uncle, Gabriel, the only remaining elder, had always been distant, watching him with unreadable eyes, as if he knew something Elijah did not. The journey to the estate was long, the road winding through dense, fog-laden woods. The trees whispered as he passed, their bare branches clawing at the sky like skeletal fingers. He gripped the straps of his bag tighter, every instinct screaming at him to turn back. But he had come too far. As he reached the estate's rusting gates, he hesitated. The house loomed before him, its windows dark, its presence suffocating. This was the place where it all began, and it would be the place where it ended. Pushing open the gates, he stepped forward, each step echoing through the stillness. The air smelled of damp earth and decay, the scent of something long dead, yet unwilling to be forgotten. As he knocked on the door, a slow creak filled the air, and it swung open on its own. Inside, the house was exactly as he remembered, cold, lifeless, yet humming with an unseen energy. He called out, his voice barely above a whisper, "Uncle Gabriel?" A pause. Then, the sound of footsteps descending the grand staircase. And there he stood, Gabriel, his figure shrouded in shadow, his eyes glowed with an unnatural light. "I was expecting you," the old man said, his voice smooth but tinged with something otherworldly. Elijah swallowed hard. He had found him, the dark magician in his family. And now, the battle for their souls had begun. The air inside the estate was thick, almost suffocating. The dim candlelight flickered against the ancient walls, casting shadows that seemed to move on their own. Elijah stood at the threshold, his heart pounding, his fingers tightening around the book in his satchel. Gabriel took slow, deliberate steps toward him, his eyes glowing with something that was no longer human. His face, though aged, bore no signs of frailty. Instead, there was an unnatural sharpness in his gaze, a cruel amusement playing at the corners of his lips. "You finally uncovered the truth," Gabriel said, his voice dripping with mockery. "But tell me, Elijah, Do you even understand what you're dealing with? Elijah held his ground, refusing to let the fear seep into his voice. I know enough, he said. You cursed this family. You made a pact with something beyond this world, and we've all suffered because of it. Gabriel chuckled, the sound echoing unnaturally through the house. Suffered? No, my dear boy. This family was gifted. While others toiled in the dirt, we thrived. Wealth, power, influence, it was all given to us. A small price to pay for something greater than ourselves. Elijah shook his head. And what price was that, Gabriel? The deaths? The suffering? The nightmares? Was it worth it? Gabriel's smile faded. You speak like a child. You think the world operates on fairness? That prayers alone can break the chains of fate? You are naive. With a flick of his wrist, the room darkened further, and the shadows on the walls stretched unnaturally, twisting into monstrous shapes. Elijah took a step back, his breath shallow. This is bigger than you, Elijah, Gabriel continued. You think you can stop this? Do you even understand what I've become? Elijah gritted his teeth. He reached into his bag, pulling out the ancient book. I don't need to understand you, Gabriel. I only need to end this. At the sight of the book, Gabriel's expression shifted. Just for a moment, a flicker of unease crossed his face. You found it, he muttered. His voice was quieter now, but laced with something deeper, anger or perhaps fear. Elijah stepped forward. The book carries the truth, the ritual that binds you to the darkness. It can be undone, and I will break it tonight. Gabriel's face twisted into a snarl. Foolish boy. With a snap of his fingers, the room came alive with a sinister force. The walls groaned, the chandeliers rattled, and the very air pulsed with dark energy. A gust of wind sent the book flying from Elijah's hands, its pages flipping wildly before landing open on the ground. Gabriel lifted a hand, and the shadows coiled around his fingers like living serpents. You have no idea what you're meddling with. You cannot stop this. Elijah's heart pounded, but he didn't back down. He lunged to the book, gripping it tightly as he read the incantation scrawled across its ancient pages. The words burned in his throat, heavy with power. Gabriel's expression shifted from rage to something deeper, true fear. Stop, he commanded. You don't know what you're doing. But Elijah didn't stop. He kept reading, his voice growing stronger with each word. The house trembled, the shadows recoiling as if in agony. The very foundation of Gabriel's power was unraveling. Gabriel let out an inhuman scream, his body contorting as the darkness inside him fought against the light. The shadows lashed out, trying to silence Elijah, but he pressed on, gripping the book with white-knuckled determination. You have no power here anymore. Elijah shouted, the final words of the incantation, leaving his lips like a divine decree. A blinding light erupted from the pages, filling the entire estate with a brilliance that sent the darkness howling into the void. Gabriel clutched his chest. The silence that followed Gabriel's fall was deafening. The estate, once alive with dark whispers and shifting shadows, now felt eerily empty, as if something had been exorcised from its very walls. Elijah stood frozen, staring at his uncle's lifeless form, the man who had tormented their family for generations, the dark magician who had bartered their souls for power, was finally gone. But was it truly over? Elijah took a slow, steady breath, his fingers still trembling as he clutched the ancient book. The energy in the room had changed. The suffocating darkness had lifted, but a strange weight still pressed upon him. He could feel it, the echoes of something unfinished. He knelt beside Gabriel's body, watching as the years seemed to catch up with him all at once. The unnatural glow in his eyes had faded, his skin pale and fragile. Without the dark force sustaining him, he was nothing more than an old man, a man who had once been just like Elijah before he made the fateful choice to walk the path of shadows. Elijah whispered a prayer, not for forgiveness, but for understanding. What had driven Gabriel to such a fate? Was it greed? Desperation? Fear? He closed his eyes, and for the first time, he felt something shift within himself. He had won the battle, but there was more to this war than he had realized. Suddenly, a gust of wind swept through the estate, and the book in his hands began to tremble. The pages turned violently on their own, stopping on a passage Elijah had not yet seen. His eyes scanned the words, and his breath caught in his throat. The ritual was broken, but the price had not yet been paid. He looked down at Gabriel again, realization dawning upon him. The dark magician was gone, but the pact he had made still lingered, binding itself to the bloodline. The shadows were not vanquished. They were waiting. If the cycle was not fully undone, they would return. Elijah's hands curled into fists. No, he had come too far to let this continue. With newfound determination, he rose to his feet. He turned to the book, his voice firm as he read the final passage aloud. The words carried weight, resonating through the very foundation of his state. The air crackled with unseen energy as the spell unfolded, reaching into the past, the present, and the unseen threads of destiny. The ground beneath him trembled. A force unlike anything he had ever felt surged through the house, rising like a tidal wave. And then, silence. Elijah opened his eyes. The house was still. The air was warm. And for the first time in generations, it felt alive. The curse had been lifted. The cycle was broken. Elijah turned toward the doorway, feeling the first rays of dawn breaking through the darkness. He had done what no one before him had dared to do. He had faced the darkness and emerged victorious, not just for himself, but for every ancestor who had suffered before him, and every descendant who would come after. As he stepped outside, the sun bathed the land in golden light. The estate, once a place of horror, now seemed at peace. And so was Elijah. The end had come for the dark magician and his family. But for Elijah, this was just the beginning.